This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, this is Mike. Okay, so this is Mike Bordonaro. As I was saying to a phone call that just came in, I was afraid it was a student calling for instruction, so I picked that up. But welcome to the third class of the DC Asset Management Lab at the University of the District of Columbia. So the class is uh, to instruct municipal professionals about proven tools and processes. And those tools and processes are the ISO 55000 Asset Management System and proven web-based tools and processes proven in the federal environment. And why are we doing this? And Jim Dieter's slide from the first week says that, well, this is the only slide that's in all 3 weeks. It will be in the fourth week, and it will be on the test. We're doing this to better understand the relationship between strategy, tactics, and operations. Usually, tactics, the information from tactics, are used to create visuals to help with operation. The tools and processes that we are presenting allow images to be created in the strategy session so that they can be also created to inform tactics and operations. So we're accelerating the chain of connection between strategy, tactics, and operations. And in the second week, a highlight of the class came after the class when one of the students suggested applying class principles to public restroom assets, which our teaching assistant and I did, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But first, let's go over the agenda. We had some excellent out-of-class discussions, and they are not anything like out-of-body experiences, as Stacy thought. So we'll overview that public restroom assets development. We're going to do some information sharing with Foretel Solutions, Michael Hardy, talking about their approach to information sharing and how it's going to touch on how ISO 55000 guides that connected information. And then Kimono Numa will be providing some asset information model instruction, and Jim Dieter will be chiming in on how those actions reflect different elements of ISO 55001. And we're going to have a little more class interaction today than previously. We're going to be starting to practice for our final workshop demonstration presentation, which is a mini real-world exercise that we're preparing for. So, public restroom suggestion. What if there was a mission to better serve citizens and visitors to DC by providing clean, secure restrooms that maximize use of limited assets for a diverse and changing population and increasing number of visitors? And what if there was a strategic asset management plan that has been approved and budgeted by City Council? So this is almost happening. There has not been an official mission statement created, and I don't think there's an actual strategic asset management plan from the City Council, but they want public restrooms. So that's the strategy. And I was mentioning to Jim that we would be doing a strategic asset management plan, and he gave me a dope slap over the phone and said, the City Council has already come up with the strategic asset management plan. They want restrooms. I'm like, oh, okay, we'll be working on an asset management plan, which is a step down from the strategic asset management plan. And I want you to understand that these are the types of discussions that you have when you're establishing your compliance with ISO 55001, and it's part of the course. And so the asset management plan can include the requirement for secure open restroom, open data sharing through all phases of the life cycle. planning, design, construction, disposition, and then hold that information, because information about one bathroom that was demolished might be beneficial to others. So at this point, if people could mute their phones, if they're not talking, that would be helpful. So making this data available through different security levels on web-based devices could involve all relevant stakeholders. So we would be meeting requirements by focusing on this information sharing aspect of asset management. So here it is related to context of the organization and what you might want to draw up if you were going to be doing an asset management plan that is to be compliant with ISO 55001. And here's how your information requirement portion of your asset management plan might look, using the same information that was stated in the earlier slides. And then performance measurement is similar to what we presented last week in class, where we can say that the data is to be monitored from initial inception throughout the life cycle, and it's available in real time. And if the data is not available in real time, then that's an indication that you're not performing at the measurement that you want to. And it doesn't require anything other than going online and seeing if the information about that restroom is available. When was it cleaned? If that information is not there, then you are not compliant with ISO 55001 9.1 performance measurement based on our own requirements for how we want these assets to perform. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's a real important part of the streamlining of this class. Of course, we can get into much more detail about performance measurements, but I just want to touch on that very briefly and distinctly. And then continuous improvement, as we said last week, for campus improvement, to be the same thing for the restroom asset management. If the information is not available on in real time on an increasing number of apps, then we're not continuously improving. So if we say that we want to have more and more apps have information about restrooms so that Uber drivers can know where to bring people for the restroom if they need, or they could use it, or if Waze has the connection to it, then we would know that we are continuously improving because more apps are being it. That's just one way of saying we want continuous improvement. It doesn't have to be, we're just trying to establish that. So our teaching assistant, Nick Noki, and I decided that we would consider using school campuses as potential sites, because the school district has decided that restrooms outside, related to their buildings would improve their assets, because they know that there's going to be security measures related to these restrooms. Whether there's cameras outside, there will not be cameras inside the restrooms, but cameras outside would give their surroundings more security. So it's a benefit for them to try to convince the city to build some of these restrooms on their campuses. And then we actually created public space, and here's the bathroom for people to look at, and there's the women's restroom, and we can start having discussions about whether that middle space, which is the mechanical space, that's way too much space. And therefore, the cost of this is going to be way too high, and we need to change that. But now we've got images for people to be able to discuss about how to plan these assets. All right, so that was just a real quick view of how this is going to work, and we're going to do a presentation on that in our final public presentation, but it'll be more refined. And if anybody has other homework projects that they want to do, they can have a slot in our public presentation and be able to present what they've done in their homework. So it's been very exciting this last week with many out-of-class discussions, and one of them was with Richard Dietz and Kimon Onuma, and some of the information from the CARS system, cost estimating, was opened up, and I believe Kimon is going to be showing what he has done with that. An even more interesting development is Kimon's team reached out to the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, because they had worked with that department previously during the Eco District BIM storm, which is part of the assigned readings. There was a BIM storm that was in the District of Columbia already, and we want you to look at what has done in the past, but some of the open data was not open, so Kimon's team approached the Office of Chief Technology Officer and went back and forth, and it's open, and the data is being shared live, and I believe Kimon will be showing some of that in the second half of this presentation. Also, I've talked with students who are already starting to test the class principles in DC projects. So some of the things that are being taught and demonstrated are at least being tested in shallow water about how this actually can work in the real world. So that was very exciting. And then I also learned about some of the administrative issues that this pilot course was intended to figure out and address. And so there's questions about grading. And I'd like to just make a philosophical statement that continuous education implies that people are going to be starting from different places. So there is no single bar for everybody to reach. What we want to do is make sure that everybody improves themselves in the class. There are some levels of minimum participation, the quizzes, and you're going to have to land a box in a restroom or whatever you want someplace so that you can understand the tool and that it's easy to use and it's possible. It's not that we want people to be technical experts. We want them to go through the process and understand the relative ease with which to make asset visualization. And then I found out that the administrative process for procuring books is slower than anticipated. So many students don't have books, which makes it hard for you to take quizzes. So I've obtained an electronic version from the author Finus Jernigan, and I will be distributing an electronic version to students, and I'll be doing that after class today. So with that, let me just go to a PDF of the book that we'll be showing, and one of the items that was on the quiz and will be on the quiz, people need to submit the quiz and send it in, but this is an important part of that first quiz. And it divides the Industrial Revolution into 4 different ages. Until this version of the book came out, I thought we were out of the industrial age and into the information age. Well, according to this approach, we're now in the connected age, which is actually very appropriate, because with all the information that's out there, what we need to do is connect to the information that's important. And a lot of people talk about the wave of information that's blowing them away. And what we're doing is offering a process to cut through that wave and get to the information that is useful to you and not be overwhelmed by the wave. So I will now introduce Michael Hardy. Michael, are you going to be talking extemporaneously, or will you be sharing a screen?
Yeah, but not sharing a screen.
This up. Okay. So Michael Hardy is Vice President of Government Solutions for Fortel Solutions. Fortel Solutions provides asset management software. One of their clients is the District of Columbia, and they are also a member of the Asset Leadership Network. And Michael is the Senior Fellow for the government, state and local government section of the Asset Leadership Network, and is very involved in advancing asset management. We are very happy he's part of this class. Michael, what else would you like to add to your introduction?
Oh, no, thank you very much for that, Mike. It's quite a nice introduction. So I'm really pleased to join you folks. I've heard a lot about what you've accomplished in the first couple of classes of this pilot, and just listening in this morning, it sounds like several folks have actually done quite a lot outside of class to really advance some of the principles here. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about sort of Fortel's approach to open data, and a little bit about how that, how that's been guided by the District of Columbia, and also talk a little bit about how we use ISO 55000 to guide the work that we're doing, and talk just a little bit about the future of that. So I think starting with what you reviewed already this morning, for those who have any, I think a lot of folks in the pilot here are directly connected to DC in some way. So you may be familiar with Fortel and how we are a part of the ecosystem in the district. So that really, when I talk about our commitment to open data, it really almost starts there, is that we see government systems as very much operating as an ecosystem. So I know that there are certainly software vendors in the world who believe in kind of the one ring to rule them all. The very, very large systems often talk about modularity and how they kind of do everything. But I think the district actually shows a better model for that. So if you think about cars in particular, and I'm sure with Richard there, you've probably had an opportunity to hear more about that already. But Fortel is a contributor to the data warehouse with cars. But so are lots of other systems. And the approach that the district takes, and I would say our willingness to participate in that, certainly allows the district to leverage a number of kind of systems and tools and things that really work well for the district. You can always, of course, do more and integrate more, and there's lots of places to go, and Kimon will show some cool things for sure. But you've got to start with, and certainly in the public sector, you have to start with that commitment to open data. And for a municipality or a state government or a county government or any sort of public sector entity, you really have to have vendors that are part of your ecosystem who share that commitment to, sort of, I would say, kind of data ownership by the city, and vendors who are certainly willing to collaborate and play well with others. So, so part of that, like I said, goes to Fortel, where really a capital planning, condition assessment tool to facilitate asset management, very heavily focused in the district around facilities. And as such, there's a pretty, it's a great repository for all the condition assessment work that's been done. And there's a lot happening to support, particular workflows that will be coming out, very soon to help, better manage data, to keep those things updated. And the district also has a really strong commitment, particularly with schools, to performing condition assessments, and those contribute on an ongoing basis to better knowledge about the, schools and government buildings and, fire stations and all sorts of other assets within the district. The other thing about open data is that it when you have that commitment that's shared, one of the things that we're working with Department of General Services right now is looking at other systems that they operate just within DGS. So things like their work order system, for example, or their kind of leasing and property management system. Those things are all, pejoratively, some folks call those things, silos. But silos aren't always bad. Again, as long as they operate in an environment where, everyone understands that the vendor doesn't own the data is owned by the district. And as such, where are the opportunities to connect those things through, APIs or even through, simpler data interoperability methodologies? The technology doesn't matter so much. It really is all about that commitment to the open data. So with that in mind, we're, like I said, super happy to be, playing our part in the ecosystem there, and we expect that to continue. And really, it allows us to focus on some of the things that we're looking forward to providing, which is really more sort of decision support and analytics around the data that, are largely, like I say, condition oriented, because that's the kind of the role that we play. But helping with that long-term trajectory so that you can make some of the planning design decisions that you folks are working on now in this course.
Michael, how does ISO 55000 contribute to what you're thinking about for improving going into the future?
Yeah, so that's kind of like the second topic. So once you have that, established the kind of that commitment, then again, as a vendor that's contributing to the ecosystem, we are then looking at, well, sharing data is great, but how are we then doing things or providing decision support that helps align to the strategic asset management plan, the individual asset management plans, and basically ISO 55000 as the framework around which everything really aligns. And if you think about all that you've learned so far, you see that it's really about establishing the objective and then establishing a way that you're going to measure and meet that objective. So from our part, again, we're not consultants. We're just, we're providing a tool set. And so we've done it. There's a couple of paths that we're pursuing there that I think are of interest to you folks. One is, I think you've already had an introduction, you certainly have met Jim Dieter. And we've been working with Jim for some time and are specifically looking at a way to incorporate the AIM for AMS tool set to allow organizations within the district to really create those plans and to align themselves to the strategic goals of the district within the ISO 55000 framework. So it's a terrific methodology. Certainly easier than kind of coming up with your own, ideas about how to tackle the standard. And we're looking to incorporate that and partner with Jim and some other efforts along that line. And then the other piece that we're doing that's kind of once you've established what those plans are and you know how to measure them and how to, how does somebody know what the objectives are, then what we're building into decision support, again, this is around planning and not design. So if you think about a planning decision in the Fortel context it's a lot about when you're going to need to do something and how much you should plan on that costing. And the tools that Kimon, has been showing you folks have a lot to do with how do you actually design for that? So if you think about it, again, in our context, it's the planning over the long term. Then we're also looking at sort of outcome-based planning. So take those measurements, those asset management plans that you can measure and you can track, and then convert those to outcomes that we can score against for planning. Now, this concept will sound familiar if you've been sort of working through some of the BIM tools already and how to figure out how to design for an outcome. This is really about how to plan for an outcome, and more importantly, how to score those planning choices. When should I replace that school? When should when does the condition of this piece of equipment dictate that it's better to replace than to continue to maintain, those kind of things. But then to score those so that when the frontline asset managers are making those decisions and building those projects to submit for possible funding, then they're actually seeing how they're scoring against the asset management plans, which really are just an expression, or they're the source of the expression of an outcome.
Excellent.
So,
Michael,
we're super excited about that.
Michael, is it okay for Jim to comment without giving away, too many secrets? Some of the things that he's working with?
Well, I don't think that there's lots of secrets for this class, and certainly Jim would always love to hear Jim's input.
Oh, is that my cue? Oh, yeah. Well, I was very interested in just hearing what Michael had to say. I think the word that I was thinking about in general through the discussion was one of the key fundamentals from ISO 55000, and that's alignment. So the idea is that, the truck driver understands how what he's delivering or picking up fits into the objectives of the organization. And from the other point of view, the senior leadership understands the value of having that truck driver doing his job and doing it in an efficient and effective manner. And I think this restroom example is, what an awesome example of, it's a strategy that's tied to, tourism and support of the citizens in the district. So it is an objective and desired outcome for the city, and through information and through the tactics We get to the operations and think about where to actually put those to achieve those objectives. And I guess the second thing is to reiterate that there's strategic asset management plans that sort of tie the strategy and tactics together. That's been a big focus of our efforts from the Asset Leadership Network, because that's the big hole that people aren't doing in general. And, in governments of various sizes and scopes, and in private organizations. And then on the other side, down to the assets and how the tactics and the information try to the assets through the asset management plan. And as Michael so aptly stated, the asset management plan is how to achieve the objective. That's really good.
So this has been some a very good discussion, words, and now we will turn it over to Kimono Numa to add some images to the concept. So Kimono, you can take over the screen.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Michael Hardy, for the great ideas and thoughts, and I'm going to try and work off of some of your comments that you made. First, I'd like to point out that we're preparing a lot of material, and so the student focusing website with resources we call the digital assets are being updated weekly, or in some cases daily. So there's some new videos, and for example, we posted how to use OpenStreetMap, and we have links at the bottom to other open source tools to work with mapping, for example, a short 6-minute video.
That's a specific response to the concept that it's not just about the Onuma system, that we're trying to show that you want to be able to use multiple tools, and
Yes.
using the Onuma system because that's the one we're familiar with, that's the one that the book is based around, but this was a specific exercise to address that. It's not just about the one tool.
Yes, exactly. And that's been, in our own case, for our own organization, we're constantly looking for open source tools to build on top of or use. So it's really, like Michael said, there's no single application that does everything, and you really have to have a mixture, especially open source tools are really pretty exciting. So I want to kind of walk through OpenStreetMap a little bit, if that's okay, Mike, and kind of show what we found. There's actually a case study, and in fact, we had a BIM storm around when the earthquake in Haiti hit. Within a day, we mobilized people around the world to start planning for how can we plan for emergency shelters. For example, here's a group that was putting in shelters and building models and where can we place them. But what we found immediately is when you look at Google Map, and this goes back to no single organization can do everything. When the earthquake hit on January 12th, and you looked at a map of what was available in Haiti, this is what it looked like on OpenStreetMap. Very few pieces of information. The major roads were there. But then, and this is a map with the overall view as far as the information that was there. But after day one, it's amazing what happened. There were people from around the world who used OpenStreetMap. By day 3, they were mobilizing remotely to actually map out Port-au-Prince, to be able to even plan for a strategy, basically, of how do emergency responders find hospitals that are open, for example, or open areas that we can put emergency shelters in. So we drew off of this in our own resource, but this is a great example of how from day 1 with almost minimal information to day 2, you start seeing hospitals and other roads, and even roads that were closed or not passable, to be able to even respond within 1 week to what was happening on the ground in real time. Here are campsites that were popping up. So we use this resource ourselves to then say, okay, let's plan on how many housing units, temporary housing units, can fit on a particular site with other groups from around the world. So OpenStreetMap, we have it linked from the site, and for those that are not familiar with it, it's actually a great tool for doing quite a few things. One of them is obviously was the Haiti response. So here's today's live view of Haiti, and Google Earth did not even have this level, or Google Map did not have this level of detail on the day of the earthquake. This is crowdsourced, so anybody can come in with a free account and actually say, well, I see a house in the aerial view of this area, and I want to edit and add a building, or I want to edit and add a restroom, or emergency shelter, or a hospital. or a road that's unpassable. So it's a real time on the ground and remotely. You don't even have to be there. You can actually open up aerial photographs that were made available. In fact, large organizations even opened up their own aerial imagery of Haiti when the earthquake hit. So there was CIA maps and then proprietary maps that they contributed, and then resources from around the world were brought in. Volunteers basically came in and started mapping these locations. So if a building was missing, you can literally go in with a few simple tools, map that out. So I'm going to pause here. I don't know, I think Mike or anybody actually, if you have any comments relating to ISO, how this fits in.
So strategic asset management plan to be prepared for disaster response.
Right.
A lot bigger than adding a restroom. But Jim, do you want to talk about any ways that ISO 55000 might be used ahead of time to be able to start structuring appropriate responses?
Yeah, sure. You know, if you have a plan, a strategic asset management plan isn't the details of how to do it. It's the structure and the framework that's created so that you can know who needs to talk to who and who makes decisions and what the policy is and what you're trying to get done. You know, it's not it's a more enduring document, but can be changed. For the example of the, you know, natural disaster, your objectives can change, you know, overnight. And that can be reflected in the plan and how can communicate to a wide audience what you're trying to do. So as I'm thinking, as I'm talking here with this, but in this case is some of the topics Kamon has already mentioned of what streets are open is important. So that is an asset management objective. You know, what where these camps are and how many structures and people they will hold is an objective. So it's a way to provide organization to the information and the decision process.
So that brings us to our Langley campus, which may choose to have a plan for how it is used if there is an emergency. And I know that many public schools are shelters, and using the format of ISO 55000 could help them understand how to be prepared to make the decisions and who needs to communicate. So go ahead, Kamon.
Yeah, so I have OpenStreetMap now opened around the Langley campus. And then important distinction is when a few weeks ago we showed an exercise of going into Google Map and tracing the buildings. The reason we had to do that is Google Map is open and free, but it's not open source. So the shape of the building, technically, you can't copy a bunch of buildings from Google Map and automatically bring them into other applications. OpenStreetMap, on the other hand, is open source, so we can actually use that shape of McKinley and bring it into the model. And that's one of the videos that we created over the week. How do you actually not have to trace the building manually? We had you go through the exercise of manually tracing so you know how to do it in case the building doesn't exist or if you want a different shape. But in this case, if you zoom back, pretty much every single building in Washington, D.C. has already been created on OpenStreetMap. And you can use this, and you can even add things that are missing. So that's if you have a free account in OpenStreetMap, you can hit edit and say, well, there's a restroom in this building. Like you mentioned, Mike, you can actually put a dot on a map and say there's a public restroom in the community center or the pool area or wherever it might be. So that's an important message there, is that OpenStreetMap data, what you can see, streets and building footprints, can be brought into other applications. What it doesn't have is lot lines, because you can't see lot lines from space, obviously. But DC government has an open data site that actually has the lot lines available. So that's a government organization that has decided to make their data accessible, which means it can be used by others. So it's a kind of a combination of things. And I kind of want to show a little bit of that, what we found because, and this is what Mike was mentioning earlier, that we knew that it was available several years ago. We worked on the Southwest Eco District, but this is now in our application. And again, we're not saying this is the application you should use or anything. It's just a matter of if applications are open and can connect, you can connect to many different sources of information. So we're seeing Esri map in the background, but we can't copy from that map. But in this case, we actually have the buildings. Actually, when I hit the buildings button, the buildings that are coming in there are actually the buildings that are coming from the DC government GIS system. So this is DC government data sitting on top of an Esri server, sitting on top of other information, sitting inside an application that allows us to start creating new buildings. And the lot lines that I mentioned are actually these right here. And because the lot lines were in GIS, we could pull them into, so we don't have to trace this lot. We actually see this lot, this parcel here, and it has a size, 5,000 square feet. That came from the official DC government site. I could have guessed it, and just like in Haiti, if the lot line doesn't exist, you can make a rough guess and say where it is, just like we did with McKinley School earlier. So notice this very rough rectangle we put over McKinley. If we had the actual lot line available from GIS, we wouldn't have had to guess it. We would be able to pull it right in and then keep on working from that.
So this is called a data mashup.
Yes, exactly.
Michael, how have you contributed to data mashups in the past?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of examples of that across, number of customers. In DC, for example, like I mentioned earlier, CARS is a great example of a data mashup where they bring in data from Fortel, from fleet systems, from GIS, from lots of other parts and pieces into their data warehouse, and in lots of other cases we're getting data from a work order system or an enterprise asset management system. Often we're providing data back to those things to help them align. So yeah, we strongly believe in the mashup concept, stressing that that there's multiple owners, called the systems owners, and that they should work together to do what they do best and contribute to the whole.
And Michael also referred to something that's important to notice. DC government is among the leaders in their data sharing. So we want to acknowledge that we're not teaching you a lot of the basics, but we're hoping to show you how to build on your excellent foundation already.
Exactly, and that's the point. We don't want to recreate the data, just like an OpenStreetMap. If one person traces a building and posts it to OpenStreetMap, it's there. And if somebody says, well, that's not exactly the right shape, you can go in and keep on making suggestions and edits. So now I'd like to kind of shift a little bit. In fact, this just surprised me. I opened up our other view here, and this just happened in the last 30 minutes, I think. My team, I told them to connect the data to DC government on all of these studios that we're using, and all of a sudden the buildings are showing up now on this particular scheme. So if data is open and easily accessible, sometimes it's minutes to actually connect it to another application. That should be the norm. It should not take a week or a month or a year to talk about it. It should just be there and accessible. Several things happened over the last week. So we talked to Richard Dietz about the CARS system, and we brainstormed a bit of some use cases, and he gave us information about cost data for buildings, for new buildings and renovations. And we used that to actually input it and update our cost estimate here. So he told us that for new construction, there was a study done. It's $570 a square foot, and it's broken down by unit format if you want to get more granular, but the overall average is $570. So when we put $570 a square foot, then it starts calculating how much that building is going to cost. So as the shapes change here, so that's one thing that we did. And a lot more can be done, I think.
Shimon, what was the cost with the new information?
The total cost?
Yeah, because I think it was in the 900,000 range before.
Yeah, let me see. So if I go to a building report here, we're at 127 million if you were to rebuild Langley Junior High School. The green box right there. Actually, that's a renovation, the renovation cost. And the new construction is we proposed a new building here. So that was new classrooms over the parking structure, 100,000 square feet. And this was 89 million based on that 570 per square foot at 99,000 square feet, 56 million plus all the overhead numbers that can be adjusted here. So that was done as we were talking to Richard. We started entering these numbers and saying, okay, here's a use case that if we want to start plopping new restrooms around, then we can start getting input from people that put a dot on a map that say we need a new restroom there, and then start calculating the cost of that small building. In this case, it's a larger building, obviously, but okay.
Thank you.
All right. So then we had some great discussions with Fortel and Michael Hardy's team, and he shared the information that Michael, I assume it's okay to show this, right? The actual, I'm just taking snapshots of the report that we talked about.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. So this is the report that you gave us. We came in cold to it, so we didn't know very much about it, but we were trying to look for use cases here, and you had a Uniformat-based roll-up of different capital expenditures by Uniformat. And then you had a floor plan, a rough floor plan of that middle school building, or junior high, as it's called, I guess here. And then you had a PDF file of the inventory of spaces. Obviously, different use cases. Some people do not need to go all the way to the space level, others do, but it really depends on what the particular use is and what's the strategy for. So you don't want to put too much information, but you want just enough to respond to Haiti, for example. You need to know where the hospital is if you don't know where it is. So what we did with this data is we took this PDF and we converted it to an Excel file to get areas out of that. And this is room by room, and then we automatically generated a first version of that building with the data. These are every single room in that inventory coming from the building, and then we started layering it in on top of the floor plan. And again, this goes to how much detail do you really want, how accurate does the square footage have to be? In some cases, you need more accuracy. So if you have a floor plan, you get a shape that's not a rectangle, and the square footage changes. And these color coding here is showing the delta between what was reported in inventory versus what we traced on top of the floor plan. So some use cases, you might want to go to that level of detail, especially if you're doing some kind of renovation to the building. And then we took the Uniformat data from the capital projects and we put those in the system as well. So let me show you that result real quickly here. This is the building that was automatically generated. So if we click on these boxes, it actually has the data, the name of the space, and the size, the dimension that came in from the Excel file. And then we took that and brought it into basically confirming the location of these spaces. There were some anomalies in the numbering, so we kind of parked some questions that we had off to the side, like this one. We couldn't resolve this corner here because the numbering was, we couldn't match this room as an orphan, but it might be fitting in there. And then in the reporting, we took the Uniformat costs from the Fortel report and we showed it here. So the use case here would be if Fortel data is available in a report and I'm coming in more from the planning or architectural side and I want to see what's in that building, then that would be just like the OpenStreetMap data. If that was flowing in here, that's certainly a possibility in the future rather than importing it in. So here's the data coming from that. And yeah, there's a lot more to it and we could do more exercises around this, but the main message really is that as you start doing scenario planning here of do we renovate this building or is the facility condition bad enough that we want to tear it down and build a new building? Does it fit there? And where can a restroom fit? And all the scenarios that we're planning there. And where are sources of data, like from DC government GIS site or from the OpenStreetMap for the buildings, or maybe from both, and you mash it up together and you keep on going. These type of tools a few years ago were impossible to get your hands on. You had to literally buy, very complex systems and get a lot of training to get the GIS data. And now it's really almost a point and click as far as GIS, putting a polygon on a map and a point on a map, just like we showed on the OpenStreetMap example in the background. Okay, I'm going to pause there.
For our public presentation, we will use Langley campus as one scenario, and we will determine as a class there at the workshop the concept of, are we investigating if we need to replace the Langley Elementary School? And we will show some cost assessments for that and some other implications. Of course, we're not even, we don't want anybody to think that Langley School is in danger of getting demolished or anything, but we're just going to do that as an exercise. And we'll be asking the students to make comments and input about what's happening or what the possibilities are. So, Jim, can you reverse engineer some thoughts on a scenario where we need to have a strategic plan for approaching this Langley campus and the possibility of renovating or rebuilding the Langley School?
Well, the idea from 55,000 is you need to understand why before you start doing things. So, what's the organizational objective? What is the asset management objective? And then you can have a basis for making decisions. So the trick is to get senior leaders to commit to what they really want to do and what resources they want to provide to do things. That ties to the other end of the making the possible reality.
Excellent. So what we'll be doing is showing some of the images of the construction that is going on near Langley and saying the neighborhood makeup is changing and we need to think about how this campus is going to respond to the changes in the neighborhood.
So Mike, maybe as we finish up the OpenStreetMap exercise, I just want to show one point. You claimed that you went to this building and there was a restroom in there that was available. Is that correct? Am I pointing the right location?
It was a very hot day and I used it more for the water fountain than I used it for the restroom.
Okay, so if we search on OpenStreetMap today and look for restrooms in this area, this restroom would not show up. So I went in with my account just now, logged in, hit edit, added a point, marked it as a toilet. There's already an icon and everything there. And and it even has other, you can say, is it a flush toilet or whatever, things like that. Is it male, female, unisex? What was it? Was it both?
Male and female, yes.
Male and female. So we'll add one at a time. And was it wheelchair accessible? So these are already hours of operation. Is it 24 hours or is it, that kind of thing. But anyway, the point here is that I can add and save this, and when I submit it, then it starts showing up on the OpenStreetMap for anybody in the world to see that. So only one person has to, and then you might say, well, that's not the right place. It's actually in the next building. So there's ways of updating it. So from a strategy perspective, having more eyeballs on the ground that know there was something there means you can actually document that it was there. And then this is all becomes open source, so I can go in and pull these data points into other systems if I want to do additional analysis in GIS, for example, how many restrooms are in this neighborhood that are public. That way you can start strategizing on, do we need to build a new one and where do we build it?
And then Michael, could you make assessment information available if that building was on one of the ones that you had conducted an assessment so that we could start understanding the condition of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like I said, we, probably if this were being built out as a, it wouldn't be that the data that DC collected would all, be contributed to Open, StreetMap. That would be a policy decision, a privacy decision, those sorts of things. Not something that, would be something we would do, but DC could decide that. But even if an internal environment were created to leverage everything Kimon's shown, and then they wanted to mash up the latest sort of condition data related to that, then yeah, absolutely, those things could be linked by API, so that as data are, new assessments are done or other data management things are completed, projects are done, and all that stuff would be automatically brought up to date.
Excellent. Kimon, what else did you want to show in the 5 minutes we have remaining?
I think I pretty much covered it. I don't want to go through unless you want me to show any more steps. I'm going to post these little snippets of how-tos online. If anybody's having any challenges, I heard Stacy say there were some questions she had. If you want to post them to me or send me a mail through the system, there's something called BIM mail. So please send a question and I'll help you directly. If anybody's having problems getting a login online and trying it with the instructions that we gave a few weeks ago, let me know as well, or let Mike know, and we'll help you get there. The other thing relating to the last thing I'd like to say relating to applications and tools and proprietary versus open, and obviously I'm showing some of the tools that we've created in-house. The trend I'm seeing in the industry is everybody's starting to become an application developer because applications are becoming much easier to build. So because of tools like OpenStreetMap, essentially you can create a simple application on top of that that says, I want to find restrooms or restaurants in DC. I can build an application on top of that. That is the trend, that we're going away from static PDF reports and knowledge trapped in formats that's not easy to share in the 21st century, into applications that are easy to build and easy to plug us together in a knowledge base to create strategies with many different people involved. Just like Haiti was on the fly, they created a strategy around these tools. So I would not discourage you from thinking in terms of, it's not necessarily a vendor coming to you only trying to sell you an application. It's an other subject matter expert that has digital tools, either that they built or they're using, or a combination of things, to be able to plug together. And that just takes off like a rocket. And that's what Big BIM is talking about. How does this future world, not future, it's actually already happening. How does the capital projects industry world plug into that capability? And that's really the only way to go in the future. There's really no way to scale the complexity that we're challenged with in our cities and in our capital projects to solve it the old way. And there's going to be a transition, which we're in right now, but it's rapidly moving in this direction.
That's a good tie-in to how we started by talking about we are in the connected age, and DC government is doing really well on many levels of connected age, but this class is already connecting some of the people across the different divisions of the DC government, and so we're making some progress already. So, I'd like to thank Jim Dieter and Michael Hardy and Kimon, and I'd like to also say that administratively, this hour was intended for lecturing, and the hour on Thursdays was intended for class discussion. But last week we stayed after class and had some pretty good discussion. So although we're ending this class now, we will stay online for a while for questions and any discussions if you have time. If you don't have time, class is dismissed. So.
Okay.
So I'd like to, I've got Richard and Stacy here in person with me. I'd like to hear from some of the students who aren't here, who are interested in commenting or talking about what they've been hearing. I don't want to single out anybody, but I do have some good questions to ask people if nobody's actually going to jump in. Edwin does not want to be known as the restroom person, but it was his idea. And we had a good talk yesterday, and I wonder, Edwin, if what we presented very rapidly here fulfilled or was along the lines of what you were thinking of how these tools and processes could be used to address that very real issue that's occurring here in DC.
Well, I thought it was a great class. I was just jotting down random questions as we went through, and question number one related to the standard ISO 55000 and sort of where we are with that standard in terms of adoption rate. Are we close to a tipping point where
No.
certifications and really drive an ecosystem, or are we still early in the process and sort of is still a living standard, so to speak, that's still coming together?
That is a yes. Sure. It's a living standard. But I'll let Jim Dieter address that, since Jim was the leader of the delegation from the U.S. to writing the standard.
You're talking the ISO 55000 standards in general? Yeah. The long-term picture is they have a standard review process every 5 years, so they get reviewed and updated. But I think the more cogent point is that they're designed not to be so detailed that they aren't flexible enough to be adaptable to any situation, from a pizza shop to a nation. There's, to my knowledge, we haven't really run into questions with 55,000 documents that there was a great need to change anything, because it's generic and it's framework. It's not the details of how you do it.
And it is always being reviewed, and ISO 55002 was just recently updated.
A second question I had was with respect to the various open data tools that we've been exposed to in the last 3 classes. Do we have sort of an archive of those? I've been trying to feverishly bookmark some of the sites as we go along, but I'm not sure I've caught them all. Like,
we will make that available. We will make that available. That's a very good question. And
I'll put the post in the link, but it's this website here. Actually, on my site at least, I've been posting all the OpenStreetMap and stuff like that down here.
Simone, we're still on the Big BIM special supplement.
Oh, sorry. It's bimstorm.com/assets2019.html, and I'm posting it right now in the chat, and we'll send it out as a link in the email as well. But there's videos, and every link that we reference, including what I showed today, I'll update down here. Links to OpenStreetMap are already here, and some other resources. We'll just keep on building this up.
Excellent. Excellent. The data mashup concept that was discussed, obviously there's a tremendous amount behind that. How do you actually get the data mashup to actually work in a coordinated way? And I don't know, maybe on Thursday, that would be a good, so if you take a look at these open tools, maybe some proprietary tools, and figure out how do you stitch together a mashup that delivers a particular capability you're looking for, associated with one of the big projects. And I know that there's probably more than the scope of the class, but it'd be good to get some pointers on that.
Yeah, just the concept of them. But first, I'm going to get you information about how to get on the Onuma system and land something, and that will be a data mashup because it connects Google Earth to the Onuma system. So by doing that exercise, you will be doing a mashup.
Yeah. And the good news is that these mashups are becoming much, much easier to do. It used to be there's still some that are very complicated, but there's some that you could just say, I want this piece and this piece to be shown together, or rules that you can set up. But one source that I reference is the DC.gov Open Data site. This has all the data that they're sharing, that's being shared, that can be either downloaded or linked to. So you can either download a file, or you can, if you have a coding capability, you can say, well, here's a code that you can cut and paste into your application if that application's set up for it. But yeah, it can get pretty complex, but the good news is it's getting simpler and simpler every year as more of these types of tools come online.
Great. Well, that's those are the only questions that I had.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I think we'll leave it at that for now. And well, Alex, did you have any comments or questions? We'll take that as a no. Thank you for sticking around for after class work, and I'll be in touch with each of you individually to see what if you need an electronic copy of the book and any other questions you might have. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Great.
Thank you. Bye.